Madame Silvercrow, or Jenny to the few of her friends, was a medium, a psychic, and a seer, and above all, a fraud. Now, that's nothing special in and of itself. There are plenty of charlatans out there that are keen to make some quick cash off of the hopes of the gullible. Jenny, though, she was damned good at what she did. There are so many skills and tricks required to perform a convincing seance that I won't list them all here. Suffice it to say that Madame Silvercrow was a natural at everything from cold reading to sleight of hand. Every time that she held a group seance, there would be at least one ardent skeptic in the room, and that skeptic would, without fail, end up convinced of her power. I know that for a fact because that skeptic was always me. Yeah, having a good stooge amongst your clients is an invaluable resource to any medium. Not to brag or anything, but I'm pretty good at it too. Between us, we came up with a whole language made up of nearly imperceptible gestures and eye movements. I'll run you through some of what we did, and I'll tell you about our last seance. Our last seance. The one that fucked everything up for good. It wasn't an unusual group by any means. Jenny and I had sized up and sussed out everybody in it before we'd even sat around the table. That's the trick, you see. You could tell a lot about a person by the way that they dress, move, and speak. Anybody older than their mid-20s almost certainly had at least one dead relative. Anybody wearing an expensive suit with cheap shoes probably wants to hear about the money that's sure to come their way. In that particular group was the classic middle-aged married couple. Husband ate too much and, judging by how the incense in the cramped little room made him sputter, smoked too much as well. The wife was shy, mousy, and probably the one who dragged the husband along in the first place. He could be an issue if he didn't feel like he was getting his money's worth. Let's call them Barry and Linda. Next was a skinny, nerdy-looking guy in his early 30s. Thinning hair, thick glasses, and ironic t-shirt. Almost certainly interested in finding out about how his sex life would be in the future. Jenny would have no problem with him. She took one look at the guy and fervently undid an extra button on her blouse. Let's call this guy Timothy. And finally, there was a sweet old lady in her late 70s, replete with a pink cardigan and a little handbag clutched to her chest. Her eyes were the biggest giveaway. Some mixture in sadness and hope that meant that she was looking to contact the dead. Most likely a husband, considering that she'd come alone. Let's call her Marge. All in all, you really couldn't ask for a better group. No real ambiguity as to who they were and what they were about. None of them had the incredibly punchable smirk unique to pop skeptics looking to foil a small-time hustler. It really should have been a clean, straightforward job. We sat around the table dominated by a large gothic Ouija board. Madame Silvercrow lit even more incense before taking a seat. She'd always felt like it was important to establish a properly smoky atmosphere before a seance. She took a look at each of us in turn, her eyes unfocused and distant, as though she saw something invisible to the rest of us. "I sense resistance to the occult forces," she said in her well-versed, ominous tone. "Somebody among you does not truly believe." Barry snorted but said nothing, and that was my cue. "Yeah," I piped up, making sure to make my voice as smug as I could. It never hurts to have the token skeptic look like a colossal prick. "I don't think that you're really psychic." Barry gave me an approving nod with Linda and Marge tutting, Timothy staring into his lap. "You wish for proof? Very well. You shall have it." Madame Silvercrow retrieved a standard tarot deck and shuffled out the cards. The usual routine here was that she would perform a fairly run-of-the-mill card trick. There are 78 cards in the tarot deck, a fact that Jenny would let the other clients know, so accurately guessing the correct card was a sure test of her psychic ability. That was the usual routine that we got most of the way through. She shuffled, and I picked out a card, and that was the easiest way to dupe the gullible. "A bloody card trick," That doesn't prove not. Barry's little outburst had sunk the plan right through. I laid my selected card face down on the table, not even bothering to look at it. Time for the stooge to come to the rescue. Yeah, he's right. A real psychic could read my mind. If I thought of a number between 1 and 1,000, you should be able to tell me what it is. Barry seemed satisfied with that one. I took out a diary and a pen from my jacket and scribbled down a number. I let Barry take a look at it, but made sure that Jenny couldn't see what I'd written. There. I jotted it down so that way there's no cheating. So now then. Go ahead. Read my mind. As you wish, Jenny said in her most mysterious voice as she closed her eyes. Focus on the number in your mind's eye. Yes. I see it clearly now. 583. And I gasped. Barry turned a little pale. The others, of whom had apparently already been willing to believe in Madame Silvercrow's power, now had every reason to fork over their money. The skeptic routine accomplishes a few things. First, it reinforces the reality of the seance for those already inclined to believe in it. And secondly, by knocking down an apparently supremely confident skeptic, other people are generally less keen to be the force of dissent. And finally, it gives both the medium and her stooge even more time to size up the clients. The seance was ready to begin. There's a whole ritualistic affair to beginning a seance. Candles are lit, along with yet more incense until the room's so heavy with the stuff that you can barely see your hand in front of your face. Madame Silvercrow would always perform a chant in Enochian, the language of the angels, in order to connect with the spirit world. In truth, the words were made up nonsense, but not by people who were experts in Enochian. So she'd never been called out on it, and it was definitely safer than Latin. Spirits, she cried as the preparatory ritual reached its climax. Are you there? It's probably fairly well known that the knocking and banging that sometimes accompanies a seance has more to do with indigenous hidden mechanism cords and occasionally audio devices than it has to do with a rampant poltergeist. Jenny's seances were no different in that regard. As the resident's hardcore skeptic, though, I did my bit by looking suitably unnerved. Not outright terrified, that would be too obvious. Just scared enough to reinforce the spookiness for everyone else. I heard the voices of the spirit world, Jenny cried in a convincing demonstration of supernatural ecstasy. Are there any among you who have a connection to the living gathered here? Oh, yes. Yes, I feel your presence. Is it a woman? Timothy asked, a little too eagerly. He caught the glances that everybody else gave him and went back to staring in his lap. No, this is a male spirit, one who has passed on only recently. Is it my Graham? Marge whispered. He died a couple of months ago. That right there? That's gold dust to a medium. A client who outright gives you the name of their deceased loved one is a gift that you just simply can't overlook. Yes, he still feels a connection to that name. Marge, he wants you to know something. What is it? I have missed him so much. Marge was already welling up with tears. That's the sign of a potential repeat customer. And maybe that sounds harsh, and in a lot of ways it is. But all mediums are just really selling hope when we get right down to it. And that's not such a bad thing, is it? He wants you to know that he's happy now that he doesn't have to lick your frigid gash, you sour-faced Bible-thumping bitch. The silence that followed was chiller than a gravestone in a blizzard. We all stared at Madame Silvercrow in abject shock, myself included. I'd seen her do some darker routines for the edgier crowd, sure, but never for a little old lady. Jenny clapped her hands over her mouth. This was the moment that I knew for sure that this wasn't some routine that she hadn't run by me. Jenny was scared. Really scared. I'm so sorry, she whimpered. I promise you that I would never... What? Tell the truth. Tell that miserable cow that her husband is rotting in hell for what he did. My husband was kind and a loving man, Marge screamed. There were tears running down her cheeks by that point, and the rest of us were frozen in horror. Jenny arched her back like a cat and turned to fully face Marge. The movements, they were too jerky and stiff. They were accompanied by an audible crack and a pop of joints. Your husband was a sadistic, murdering fuck. The maggots of the pit are slithering under his skin even as we speak, all while he screams, I had orders, over and over, on and on, forever. Marge sat back, her face chalk white. The look that she had was something that I'd only seen once before while on jury duty. It was the look that the defendant had given me when a lawyer unveiled concrete evidence, tying him to a crime that he'd insisted that he never committed. And in that moment, I realized just how superficial my reading of her had been. Nothing to say, Jenny continued. You know what he did to those prisoners. War doesn't excuse killing in cold blood. You know that. It was far easier to do nothing, though, wasn't it? No amount of Sunday confessionals will wipe your filthy soul clean. Her voice had started to lose its mysterious feminine quality, becoming harsh and rasping. The sound of it conjoined an image of something trying to speak with a mouth and a throat so dry that they might well be clogged with ash. He was a good man, was all Marge could whisper. You can tell him that yourself soon enough. He has plenty of maggots to share, and they're always hungry. Where are you going, you quivering cocksucker? Jenny snapped her head around towards Barry and Linda, who had been surreptitiously moving towards the door. I won't stand for this, Barry replied, apparently an instinct. He was a man used to demanding to see managers, not insults. And even so, his voice trembled as he spoke. You sit your bloated carcass back on the table. I'm scared, Barry, Linda wailed as she tried to hide herself behind him. Sit down. That command. There was nothing human about the tone. The couple couldn't disobey. Nobody could have disobeyed. I wanted to do something. Maybe run, maybe tell Jenny to stop, tell her that whatever game that she was playing wasn't funny. I don't know. Something, you know? Anything to just get what was happening to stop, because I knew deep in my very soul. I knew that it was no game. Now then, Mary, where do we begin with you? Jenny spoke with a sort of false sympathy that made my skin prickle. You want to tell your wife about your dirty little secret? Or should I? What's she talking about, Barry? I have no idea, came the automatic, panicked response. Jenny's eyes bore into him with such ferocity that I half expected him to catch fire. Your big husband has a secret box, filled with secret photographs. It's not true. He's been collecting them for some time. Jenny carried on, ignoring the outburst.
he adds to his collection every time your daughter invites her friends round for a sleepover.
Barry's head dropped, and he put his hands over his eyes. Linda moved back from her, her mouth opened in an O of disgust.
Oh yes, Big Barry likes to tug his meat to pictures of little girls in their PJs. It's nothing compared to what he's got on his computer, mind you. That's where things get nasty.
How could you? Linda gasped.
Don't pretend to be innocent, you fucking whore.
The violent fury of the outburst made everybody jump back in their seats.
You may not want sex with kids, but don't pretend to be innocent. You've had so many lovers behind your husband's back. It's no wonder that he can't satisfy you anymore.
Jenny sat back in her chair, her hateful glare never leaving the couple for a moment.
There are creatures in hell that know all about the joys of the flesh. I don't expect you to welcome their attentions.
The classical middle-aged couple with their dirty little secrets.
Oh, Timothy. Dearest Timothy.
Jenny snarled. The nerdy-looking guy squirmed in his seat, and he looked ready to burst into tears.
Please don't.
Please don't. Oh, pretty please.
Jenny sneered.
What sins could you commit? You're too weak for wrath, too anxious for sloth, and too fucking pathetic for lust. No. Your sin just has to be envy.
Timothy did start to cry then. Not that anybody was in any position to judge him. The others were sniveling wrecks, having had their sordid pasts brought out into the open, and I couldn't do anything but wait for my turn. And I won't lie, I was fucking terrified.
Everybody always had it so much easier than you. Everybody had it so much better than you. Did you ever stop to think that maybe that you were the problem? Of course, you know deep down that you're at the bottom of the fucking food chain and always will be.
Don't.
That's why you had to get vindictive, isn't it?
Jenny said, her eyes lighting up with evil triumph.
There was a boy in your school who you focused all that pent-up spite on. He had everything that you lacked. He was everything that you weren't.
Please.
You were too small and too chicken shit scared to hurt him directly. Instead, you took it out on his little dog, didn't you? An animal too small to fight back. Even then, you had to use poison.
He was a bastard.
Timothy screamed, revealing a vicious streak I'd never suspected that he could possess.
He didn't deserve what he had.
There's nothing more wretched than something like you,
Jenny hissed.
You're fit only to lick the shit and blood off the walls in hell.
And at that moment, I despised everything else in the room. And at that moment, I despised everybody else in the room. Under different circumstances, I'd have been laying into them. And as it was, the only thing that I could focus on was the knowledge that I was next.
And you,
Jenny said, turning to me as I'd expected and dreaded.
Don't think for a moment that you're going to miss out, you fucking snake.
Those eyes tore me to pieces. I never felt anything like it before or since. I knew instinctively that I was looking into the eyes of something that was already ancient before my distant ancestors had first crawled out of the ocean. And I couldn't stand it. Greed, I cried, my voice tinged with hysteria. My sin is greed. I confess it, you hear me? I confess!
Oh. Clever boy,
Jenny whispered.
Yeah. Your sin is greed. You're a charlatan, a fraudster, a con man, a liar, a hypocrite, and a cold-hearted manipulator.
I am all those things, oh God, I am all of those things.
You're a stooge, willing to cheat these people out for their money. And you've gotten quite good at playing people's fears and desires, at conning them into giving you what you want. How many innocents have you sold false hope?
So many, I gasped. Please, I confess it all.
Oh, you confess everything, do you?
That got me. It was as if somebody had dropped a frozen anvil onto my stomach. And I realized that I'd been an idiot trying to get off lightly. Jenny, or whatever was speaking through her, would have never fallen for it. I've confessed.
No, you haven't. All of this glorious stage magic is the least of your crimes. Tell me, what do you think your punishment should be?
And I swallowed. I don't know.
In that case, I'll tell you. You will have more riches than you could possibly imagine. Enough gold and silver to fill the universe 1,000 times over. We'll even melt it down for you to make it easier to drink. I can't think of anything more appropriate. Somebody willing to kill their own parents for their inheritance money.
That was it then. I was damned and everybody knew why. There aren't words for how that feels. It's beyond shame and terror. The thing inside Jenny didn't have any parting words. It had said enough. She writhed and screamed as it left her body. Her bones snapped and her eyes melted in their sockets as the evil force abandoned her. And by the time that she was free of it, she lay in a weeping, agonizing heap on the floor. And none of us paid her any attention. We were all too preoccupied with our own misery. And idly, I picked up the tarot card that I'd selected from the pack earlier. I didn't need to be psychic to know which card it would be. I first heard this story when I was 8. I was having a sleepover at my friend Matt's house, and it was getting pretty late, to which my friend suggested that we go to bed. And when I asked him to stay up a little longer, he replied with, "We can't. The Scissor Man will find us." "Who's the Scissor Man?" I asked curiously. "He's the ghost of the school groundskeeper who kidnaps and murders children," Matt replied wide-eyed. I raised my eyebrows in palpable fear and a tickle of morbid fascination. I wanted to know more about this. The story had apparently been circulating around my town for years, and yet for some reason, I never heard it before that night. Matt proceeded to tell me the story of the Scissor Man, which goes as follows. Years ago, there was a groundskeeper in our town's elementary school whose name was long forgotten. He was a silent and scary-looking man, only speaking when he needed to scold misbehaved children. So all of the kids started avoiding him. He would often be seen with garden shears, cutting grass and trimming the hedges around his small home. He lived just off of the school grounds in a small house. Kids would often hear the snipping of his shears before seeing him appear, hence the name Scissor Man. Stories started to circulate about how the Scissor Man killed his wife with his shears and escaped to our small town, where he decided to lie low and escape the police. However, more sinister stories started to emerge soon about the Scissor Man kidnapping and brutally murdering the school's children with his shears. At first, those were just rumors, scary stories to tell around the campfire. But soon, children actually started disappearing. 1, then 2, and then 10. In a small town like this, even one disappearance was a nightmare. And since the police had no solid evidence to pinpoint a suspect, the townsfolk took it upon themselves to bring justice for the missing children. They armed themselves and marched to the Scissor Man's house, none of them having any proof, but clinging on to the urban legend like moths to a flame, desperately looking for some sort of answer about the missing children. Not even giving him a chance to explain himself, the mob invaded the Scissor Man's home and brutally beat him, forcing him to confess to what he did to the children. He proclaimed his innocence and begged them not to kill him, but they refused to listen. They saw the shears that he so loved, sitting right on the kitchen table. It's unknown who delivered the final blow, but the story ends with the Scissor Man getting killed by his own shears, his throat snipped open and him bleeding on his living room floor. Years have gone by since then, and the missing children were never found, but the disappearances stopped. And for a while at least, the children who went on to school while the Scissor Man worked there grew up and had their own children, and that's when the disappearances started once more. It was around that time that the townsfolk realized what a terrible mistake their parents had made in murdering the wrong person, but it was too late. A new tale emerged for the ghost of the Scissor Man who was still around, seeking revenge against the descendants of those who were responsible for his death. Although the names of the townsfolk responsible were well known, most of the people turned a blind eye to it. They were mortally scared for their own children, afraid that the Scissor Man would come for their children next because of what their parents did. The disappearances happened in an unpredictable manner, once a year, once every 2 years, but children would still disappear, despite the precautions the parents and schools took. A lot of the people moved out by the time that I was born, and many others who stayed accepting the fact that their children might end up missing one day if the Scissor Man so willed it. Not even 3 months after Matt had told me about that story, he went missing. The last time that I saw him, we were saying goodbye after school and making plans for our next sleepover on the weekend, and I never saw him again. I grew up with the tale of the Scissor Man, fearing every day when I returned from school that I would hear the snipping of those garden shears. And then the disappearances stopped once again, this time for a few years. The people hoped that it was finally over. However, the lack of children going missing was only a reprieve. In time, the stories remained even as I grew up, as an urban legend, and then the disappearances started once more once I became adult age. It's strange how the town got accustomed to it, as if it were a completely normal thing. No one talked about it, since they felt that if you brought up the Scissor Man's name, it would bring his presence and put one's family in danger. I stayed in town and found a relatively good job, and despite having to do a lot of overtime, I didn't complain. Life went on as normal as could go under such circumstances. And then one evening a few months ago, I was sitting at home and flipping through TV channels when the news popped up. The screen changed to a reporter standing in front of the elementary school with a microphone in hand, and he said,
"The police are saying that they are a step closer to finding the notorious Scissor Man."
And this got my attention. I leaned forward, transfixed onto the TV. I spent a portion of my teenage life obsessing over the Scissor Man, trying to dig up any meager scraps of information available on him. The man on the TV continued.
"The serial killer known as the Scissor Man has been terrorizing our small town for more than 30 years, and despite the efforts of the police, he was never found. However, with the newest information emerging, the police say that it's only a matter of time before the suspect slips again and brings himself closer to being caught."
I found myself gripping the armrest of the sofa with a feverish grip. Could this be it? The reign of the Scissor Man finally coming to an end? I continued listening to the man on the news.
"The police suspect that the murderer is inside the town and to be considered extremely cunning. He could be hiding anywhere, even inside your homes. Make sure to lock your doors and windows whenever you leave your homes or before going to bed."
There was a muffled thump from my basement. I felt my heart beginning to race. I turned down the TV and perked up my ears. It was unnervingly quiet. It felt as if whatever had made the noise was aware of how loud it was and was now trying to be quiet. I slowly stood up, heart thumping in my chest. I approached the basement door and put my ear against it. But I couldn't hear anything. No. There was something in there. But I just couldn't tell what. It was too quiet and inconsistent. I mustered the courage I had and I turned the key, swinging the door open. I was met with the faces of bound and gagged children. One of the children lay motionless on the floor, his features indiscernible from the dark. Tears streamed down the other children's face, and at their sight of me, they whimpered even louder. I put my finger over my lips in a shh motion and said, "Don't make a sound, or there will be more snipping." And I smiled and I closed the door, locking them up again. I would need to be more careful not to leave traces for the police to find from now on. And I glanced to the right, towards the blood-stained garden shears on the shoe stand. The same ones that my grandfather and father used before me.
We have what we see.